Dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Global Compact Network Netherlands, I would like to welcome you to this webinar about sustainable leadership, organized by Global Compact Network Netherlands in collaboration with Russell Reynolds. My name is Linda van Beek, Executive Director of Global Compact Network Netherlands. During the Leaders Summit of UN Global Compact, the publication Leadership for the Decade of Action was launched on sustainable leadership. I was personally triggered by this publication because it's not a secret that we need more sustainable leadership in the world. 2020 has been called by the UN the Decade of Action and the Decade of Delivery. And with 10 years to go on the SDGs, we need an acceleration. Therefore, we need the most senior people, CEOs, the executive teams and the boards to use their power to become leaders for social and sustainable change. Following the latest UNGC report, 71% of the CEOs agreed that business can play a critical role in contributing to the SDGs, but only 21% answered they are actually playing a critical role at the moment. So there is room for improvement. To create a supportive foundation for transition, we need bold and visionary leadership. In the meantime, the leaders of the future are already knocking on the doors. Many young professionals are convinced the company they work for should increase their impact on the SDGs, but they are in the beginning of their career and not always able to bring their ideas to the right tables. As Global Compact Network Netherlands, we want to play a role in these challenges. We offer knowledge and tools to the managers who are struggling with the translation of the SDGs into their business. In the beginning of 2021, we will start with the rollout of the SDG ambition. Moreover, engaging young professionals and equip them with the needed skills for sustainable leadership is one of our priorities. They can take part into our Young Professionals program. At the end of the year, we will start with a new Young Professionals team. But it starts with the realization sustainable leadership is important for your company and for the world. In this webinar, we will explain what sustainable leadership means and how you can implement it into your organization. It's my pleasure to announce now Hans Reus, one of the co-authors of the report Leadership for the Decade of Action. Hans, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share our joint research done by Russell Reynolds and UN Global Compact. Allow me to spend 1 minute as a personal introduction explaining why I'm so passionate about the topic of sustainable leadership. Having worked with McKinsey for about 6 years, I joined Russell Reynolds in 2001. And the first couple of years, I just did all kinds of search work until in 2006, I watched the movie, and I guess many people have been watching that one, An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. That was truly inspiring to me, and I started organizing a number of conferences on the topic of clean tech. Unfortunately, as we all know, in 2008, the financial crisis hit in, and the topic of sustainability and clean tech sort of disappeared. Fast forward to 2016, by that time I was 15 years with our firm, and I asked myself, am I really going to do this for another 15 years? And went to one of these leadership trails. You see here a group of people in Botswana. We spent a week thinking about the big questions in life, and I came back with the notion that what I really enjoy doing is helping clients recruit leaders who not just run that company in a profitable way, but also in a sustainable fashion. And I started writing an article on that, went to a number of conferences, presented at Spring Day, participated in the World Economic Forum Sustainability Summit in New York and so forth. And all that led to the article and the research piece that we're about to go into. So let me share the main findings of that research that we conducted together with UN Global Compact over the last 12 months or so. The first question is, how often is sustainable leadership actually a requirement when appointing senior leaders or supervisory board members? We defined a list of some 25 terms, including sustainability and SDGs and ESG and you name it, and counted how often each of those words actually appeared. We produce as a firm something close to 4,000 position specifications every year. And it turned out that in only 15%, so 1/5, of these position specifications showed the word sustainability. You can forget about the other 24 terms. Sustainability was the one that by far appeared the most. These 15% of occurrences was mostly in the context of describing the organization. So if an organization needs a new CEO, they would tell the audience that organization, that company is very sustainable. However, if you then scroll down in the position specification and you look for the criteria that the new CEO or CFO or board member needs to meet to be considered for the role, it's only 4%. Now that is a very small percentage. So only 1 in 25, 4% of the position specifications actually requires that the new CEO has some kind of sustainable leadership. That percentage needs to go up. But imagine, say 6-7 years ago, with respect to diversity and inclusion, those percentages for diversity and inclusion at the time were very small as well. So we're in the beginning of a journey. So it's my conviction, also my goal, to make sure that this percentage goes up over time. So we started early this year to interview 55 CEOs and board members and 12 subject matter experts who were mentioned to us by UN Global Compact worldwide, because globally these people were seen as champions in the area of sustainability in their own industries. You can see here on the slide that it's a global panel, so across continents, representation with both women and men, of course, and across industries. And the goal of the research was, how can we help organizations make sustainability core to their leadership teams? So let me share some of the main findings from that research. The first part concentrates on how did these champions become sustainable leaders? And we distinguished 3 categories. The first category are the born believers, people who in their upbringing, in their religion, through their parents, were led to believe that sustainability is really, is really core to what they do. A second category are the convinced, the people who during their careers said, I have now a role with increasing responsibility, but with that responsibility comes an obligation as well. I want to run this organization not just profitably, but also in a sustainable fashion. And you have the third category that we labeled the awoken. So in other words, the people who at some point had a major event in their life, typically a crisis. It could be they lost a loved one. It could be that some of them experienced the tsunami, some the earthquake in Japan, and so forth. There's of course a little bit of overlap between these categories. There could be people who fall in all 3, but by and large, the percentages that we saw were the following. And if you look at these percentages, the conclusion is 43% of the convinced and 12% of the awoken. That's over half, 55%. Of these people grew into sustainability over time during their careers. This is something that can be developed, and that's a hopeful data point. The next piece we looked into is, let's do what we call a route to the top analysis. How did these people arrive in these roles? And we had a control group against whom we compared these CEOs that we interviewed and other executives. And it turns out they have a much more holistic perspective on the world. For instance, they're 3 times as likely to have worked on 2 continents. Also, 1 in 3 of these CEOs that we interviewed worked in the global south, compared to 1 in 10 in the control group. And last but not least, they were twice as likely to have significant experience across 2 functions or more. So not just in finance, but also in sales or also in marketing and so forth. So all in all, you get the view that these leaders have a much more holistic, integrated, and broad perspective on the world and on business in general. So what are sustainable leaders? How do we define sustainable leaders? When interviewing these people and we tried to synthesize the findings, we really felt that there were 5 elements that were crucial. At the core of it all is what we call the sustainable mindset. that is a firm belief that organizations, and especially in the private sector, need to be run in both a profitable way. I mean, that is still obviously very important, both profitability, growth, but also sustainability. It's not either or, but both and having that conviction is crucial. And then there are 4 elements around this. The first one we've called multi-level systems thinking. What we mean with that is these leaders are very good at not just considering their own organization, their own company, but have a perspective on the industry at large, have a perspective on the world at large. So a much wider perspective than many executives have. They think about fast forward loops, feedback loops, throughput times, interdependencies. So it's really considering the entire system that these companies operate in. The next one is stakeholder inclusion. And for each of these model elements, you'll find quotes by CEOs in the report that Linda just kindly mentioned. Stakeholder inclusion is the ability to create value with your stakeholders. That could be your shareholders, could be your employees, could be your suppliers, could be your staff. The goal for them is to create value together, but then also share that value. Let me give you an example. One of the CEOs said, during the COVID-19 crisis, we went to our suppliers and said, dear supplier, we really value the partnership that we have with you. Let us offer you more favorable payment terms for you, so that you can come out of this crisis stronger in our partnership as well. Another CEO said, let me go to my customers, because I know some of the customers have very thin margins. Let me go to those customers and offer them more favorable payment terms. That is not Santa Claus, that is good business, because in the long term, these suppliers or customers will likely to be strong partners for this organization. The next one is disruptive innovation. These leaders that we interviewed are really good at not accepting the status quo. They keep asking, why do we do it this way? Can it not be done differently? And that's how major innovations are born, through massive R&D investment as well. But the sheer vision, with laser focus, saying, this is what we want to achieve. This is how we embed sustainability in our strategy. This is how we're going to fund our innovation and R&D to make sure that we come up with, with disruptive solutions that really contribute to both the bottom line as well as society at large. And the last one, the last element that these leaders are very good at is long-term activation. It's not just about them. It is about embedding the sustainability strategy and business strategy into the organization, into the culture of the organization. And I have a slide on that in a few minutes to talk about that in more detail. So this is what the sustainable leader is all about. Now you might argue or might ask, what makes that leader then different from the normal leaders that we typically appoint in such positions? Look at leaders at 3 levels. One is the track record. What have they actually accomplished? One level deeper is how have they accomplished this? This is what the psychologists typically call the competencies. And the third level, the deepest level, is why were they driven to accomplish the things that they've been able to realize. Let me go into each of those 3 for a few moments. If you think of top-tier leaders who are not sustainable business leaders, we'll get to those in a minute. What top-tier leaders, take the CEO of the company you currently work with. What they must have is, they typically must have relevant industry knowledge. They must have the right functional expertise. So being a CEO, having been a CEO before, they must have the ability to deal with the right geographic scope. If it's a global company, it helps if they've been operating in multiple continents before, and they must have the right complexity and scale, of course, relative to the size of the company that they're about to join. They also need to be good at setting strategy. There are often competing competencies here, but they need to be able to set a strategy, to execute for results. In other words, really get things done. They need to be able to influence others, and they need to be able to lead teams. And last but not least, often we do extensive, if not always, we do extensive integrity checks. You know, is there any doubt, any shred of doubt on the integrity of a particular candidate? So all of these requirements, all of these indicators are crucial, but they're not enough. They're not sufficient to also be a sustainable leader. There is a number of additional indicators. So real sustainable leaders, as you know, run an organization in both a profitable and a sustainable fashion. So they also need to meet a set of additional criteria, and you see them here on the right-hand side of the slide. A sustainable leader will be able to demonstrate a series of initiatives, projects that he or she has launched that has both financially successful, but also in terms of sustainability, successful results. They need to be strong in the requirements that we discussed a minute ago when we spoke about the sustainable leader. So they need to be good at this systems thinking that we spoke about stakeholder inclusion, you know, jointly creating value and also the ability to share that value. They need to be good at innovation, and they need to be very good also at embedding you know, sustainability in the organization at large so that it sticks. But first and foremost, they must have this mindset that an organization, a company needs to be both profitable and sustainable, not either or, but both and. All right. Now you might ask, how do you determine whether candidate A is a more sustainable leader than candidate B? There's a couple of sources of information. One is the interview with the executive search firm or with, you know, the hiring manager in your organization. That is probably the most important source of information, interviews. In addition to that, you have reference questions, you know, references. When you speak to other people who have worked with those candidates over the past couple of years and you ask their impression on how sustainable this leader is. You could also think about what we call psychometric tests. So those are online surveys that you ask the candidate themselves to, you know, to fill out. And those tests as well give valuable information. If you combine those three sources of information, you get a very robust picture on who is the better sustainable leader of, you know, of the finalist panel. But some of the questions, let me just show some of the questions that you might want to ask in interviews. First one here on the screen is, you know, how should businesses in your industry define and measure their long-term success? That is a question that is not often asked in interviews. Very broad question, and that gives an indication of how good candidates are in the multi-level systems thinking that I referred to previously. So if they come up with only financial measures, that's obviously not good enough. There's more to it, and they should be able to answer that question. The second one is clearly about stakeholder inclusion. These are just some examples. You know, in your current role, who do you see as your major stakeholders, and what are your responsibilities to them? What do they value, and what have you done to, you know, create partnerships with these key stakeholders? And the third one addresses their sustainability mindset. You know, which of the world's major social or environmental challenges are you most passionate about solving, and why is that? So that gives you a flavor for how you know, passionate they are about sustainability, and if there are specific topics that they're passionate about, and to what extent they align with what your organization stands for. So it's not just about the leaders, but it is also about the organization at large. So let's talk for a minute about how to embed sustainability in the organization as a whole. And there are four key ways to do that. One is selecting the right leader. So whenever there's an external leader required, you know, we just spoke about what type of requirements these people need to meet and how you could interview them, for instance. But the same goes for internal succession planning. Obviously, sustainability doesn't necessarily come from the outside, it comes from the inside as well. But that means that, you know, many organizations have some kind of succession plan, or they have a leadership framework, or both. And oftentimes sustainability is not yet embedded in such frameworks. So that would be my call to action to organizations. Make sure that sustainable leadership, as we've just defined it, is also becoming a part of your own succession plan and the criteria that you use for succession planning. The third one is the way how you reward your people, especially for the senior people, and then that trickles down to the rest of the organization. What are their objectives? How are they compensated? And to what extent is sustainability really a material key performance indicator for their short-term bonus, long-term bonus, equity returns, and so forth? So that would be a third one. And the last one is about development. It's one thing to select the right leaders internally and externally to reward them, but you also need to provide opportunities for people to learn. So make sure that sustainability is also a part of the training and development programs, of the choices you make when you award a certain project to employee A versus B, because that project may be very important with respect to sustainability, and you may want certain people to learn and benefit from those. There's all kinds of universities out there, both in the Netherlands, be it TIAS or Rotterdam School of Management or Nyenrode, that offer, and there are others as well, but that offer sustainability leadership programs that will be helpful for your senior leaders and for your organization at large. So when we spoke about long-term activations, long-term activation, leaders that are really good at this, at long-term activation, master these four buckets, if you will. So summarizing, before we open the floor to discussion and all kinds of questions, what I've tried to do in the past 50 minutes or so is, first of all, the call to action that sustainability needs to be embedded in leadership requirements, that 4% needs to go up to 25, 30% or higher if at all possible. We discussed the model of sustainable leadership with the 5 elements, the sustainable mindset, the multi-level systems thinking, the stakeholder inclusion, the disruptive innovation, and the long-term activation. We discussed the journey to sustainable leadership. How do you become a sustainable leader? So we mentioned the fact that the current sustainability champions, if you will, have a very holistic view of the world, having worked in multiple continents, having worked in multiple functions, and having worked more often than their control group in the global south. We also spoke about the ways organizations can integrate sustainable leadership into their company culture, the selection, the succession planning, the rewards, and the training and development. And last but not least, we touched on what kind of questions you could ask in interviews to compare candidates, to find out who is the better sustainable leader.
What is your advice for future leaders and or high potentials?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have a lot of faith and confidence, by the way, in the next generation, because you can see the passion that there is for sustainability in that generation. I have a number of tips. One is learn and read as much about the topic as possible. Read about the Sustainable Development Goals. Read the drawdown report. Go to sustainability conferences like Springtij, or read duurzaambedrijfsleven.nl. That type of sources of information. But also make sure that you have a balanced set of sources of information. Don't just read the green bubble, but also read the opposing views, because it'll help you understand how the people think who have a different perspective on the world that you may have. Find sponsors higher up in the organization who do get it. And if there are senior people who don't necessarily get the topic of sustainability, you're welcome to nudge them from time to time. Up to a point, of course. There's no point in ruffling too many feathers, but if you have high potential lunches or things like that, it is helpful to raise the topic. I would also say embed sustainability in your own area of responsibility. If you're a product manager or a supply chain manager, demonstrate to the organization that integrating sustainability into your area of responsibility actually works, and show them the results, and show them that the people in your team are very happy, that they like working with you because they feel they do something very meaningful. Also, when offered a new job, sometimes you're getting the question, would you be interested in this promotion? That is a good moment to negotiate. You can negotiate about compensation, of course, but you can also negotiate about, actually, I'm very passionate about the topic of sustainability. Would you mind sending me to this university that has a that has a sustainability program? Or on the content side, when you give me this mandate, will there be room for me to also integrate sustainability, and can we agree on targets? And last but not least, I would say lead by example, not just in your organization, but also at home. Try and live in a sustainable fashion so that you're credible also to the people around you.
Hello, everyone. Jenny Davis-Peku, with Bain Company, leader of our global sustainability and corporate responsibility practice. Hans, thank you very much for your comments. I was curious how you see boards and executive teams wrestling with the increasing demands on future leadership. It's not just sustainability, but it's diversity and digital and new business models. Can you find candidates that embody it all, or do you look for minimum thresholds? Do you go down the more specialist route? Obviously, it's tricky if you go specialist because you need sustainability to be part of everyone's role and consciousness. How do you advise your clients around that leadership mix?
And you're absolutely right, Jenny. It is another requirement, right? In addition to the pretty long list already. So it is something you need to throw in the mix, and trade-offs will have to be made. Oftentimes clients require people who have certain industry experience, and if you add sustainability on top of the list, there may be a trade-off that needs to be made. Some candidates may not have that specific industry experience, but they bring a lot of sustainability experience, and then you may say at some point, well, actually in that team we already have a number of industry specialists, but we don't have a strong sustainability expertise in the supervisory board or in the executive team. So trade-offs will need to be made. I typically tend to say that Superman or Superwoman doesn't exist, but super teams do.
Thank you for the presentation. I was thinking whether you actually already see, since you started the research, that indeed more companies are taking this criterion into consideration. And if so, if they have to make a trade-off between kind of the old school skill, so to say, and this skill, and whether they increasingly also swing or give more weight to this criterion.
So the weight is definitely going up. We can see that there's a lot of enthusiasm about the topic, which is a good thing. We track that for each of the sectors around the world. There are also some differences geographically. The topic is definitely on a rise, and what is very interesting to see that especially the financial services sector is embracing this topic. You see large private equity companies, you see large institutional investors really coming to grips, especially with the acronym ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. And that is a huge push in the financial services industry, but also therefore in the companies that they invest in. So the momentum is big, and I'm also pleased to see that despite the pandemic, the momentum continues. So very different compared to the 2008 situation, the financial crisis that I mentioned. At that time, sustainability sort of dropped off the C-suite agenda, if you will. But many leaders now say this is we need to look at the COVID crisis, the pandemic, as a wake-up call, because there are other things that are more important in addition to shareholder return.
How to engage senior leadership in sustainability bottom up. So if I'm not already in senior leadership, but I want my senior leaders to become this sustainable leader, as explained in your report, how do I engage them in that?
Yeah, it's a similar question to the one that was asked a minute ago. I would repeat what I said. Make sure you're very knowledgeable about the topic. find sponsors, find groups also in your organization, build the coalition of the willing, if you will. Not everyone is passionate about the topic. Not everyone has the same perspective on the world. But if you can find people in your organization that share your views, try and build coalitions, build teams, try and create project teams, and do it that way and make it happen. Be brave, be bold, but base that on knowledge and science. There's a lot of information out there. And clearly also UN Global Compact Netherlands has a great deal of information that you can benefit from and use it to take your organization and yourself to the next level.
This is the first time that you've created such a report. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I started writing an article in 2018, but this was the first time that we launched one in conjunction with UN Global Compact.
Can we expect more of these reports in the future, since it would be interesting to see if those numbers will start shifting in the right direction, so to say?
Absolutely. We will monitor and track that. And as a firm, we put an organization in place, with people across industries, across geographies to monitor this, but also to advocate this. We have a role to play as the search industry and certainly as our firm to discuss this topic with our clients and at least ask the question, if not try and convince them that sustainability should be an additional leadership requirement. Moreover, we're doing all kinds of research at the moment on how to make this practical, which psychometric tests to use, which questions to ask to candidates, which questions to ask to references. So there's more information than this report and more to come as well.
What I would like to know, how could the supervisory board members develop themselves on this topic? That's one thing. And the other thing is, how could they drive also the agenda towards the board and maybe deeper in the organization?
Fantastic question, close to my heart, Jan. Thank you for asking. The first one I would say is introspection for the board members. What are you really passionate about yourself in terms of sustainability? I asked the participants to the TIOS executive program that I was a guest speaker at about 2 months ago. Take the 17 sustainable development goals and add 2 columns next to them. And one column, put tick marks in those sustainable development goals that you really enjoy, that you really are passionate about, that when you have a moment to spare during the weekend, that you enjoy reading about a bit more. And the second column is which of these sustainable development goals are you actually somewhat knowledgeable about. You don't have to be the world expert, but if you're in a supervisory board role, by that time you no doubt have lots of areas of expertise, and which of those could you leverage to the benefit of the sustainable development goals. So that's a good start. As I said, there is a number of sustainability programs out there at major universities. I mentioned a few in the Netherlands. INSEAD has one. The Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership is another one. So there is a number of national and international universities out there that offer specific programs for supervisory board members to not only enhance their knowledge in the area of sustainability, but also in the area of how to help executive teams and how to put the sustainability topic on the agenda, if you will. So that would be 2 answers to your question, Jan. One is get knowledge, make sure you're knowledgeable, but also look at yourself and say, which of these topics am I truly passionate about, and therefore am I even in the right supervisory board role, or should I try and find another one that is more aligned with the passion you may have for energy transformation or climate change or food supply or whatever. And I would also say, if you're in a supervisory board and a new board member needs to be found, ensure that at least some kind of sustainability passion or mindset is part of the criteria. So you have a buddy with whom you can team up and with whom you can get the ball rolling even more.
Yes, we are coming to the end of this webinar. I really liked the discussion and all the questions that came up. Hans, you made very clear that sustainability is a leadership imperative. The time to act is now. And you have perfectly showed it's worth to make sustainability core to the DNA of leadership teams. It was also very, I really thought it was informative how you can embed sustainability into the culture of your company. You can find the report on our website. So please also send it, download it and send it to, for example, to the HR teams in your company, the supervisory boards. Thank you also to all the participants at this webinar. If you have questions about the report or about our activities, Global Compact, please let us know. With Global Compact Network Netherlands, we will start with two new young professional groups. And Hans, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering all the questions. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Linda and Marco for the opportunity. Really much appreciated. Have a wonderful day and keep well.